Thank you all for your attention. Just real quick, I want to introduce our next two speakers. Very excited to have them back. Jory Marino and Dan Kaplan from Heidrick and Struggles, good friends of ours, and this is their second time attending DT as speakers, so we thank you very much. For those of you who don't know them, Jory Marino is Vice Chairman of Strategic Initiatives for Heidrick and Struggles, and Dan Kaplan is the Managing Partner and Practice Lead for the Global CHRO Department over at Heidrick. And they'll be talking today about the accelerating performance and the impact on talent. So very exciting presentation, and we appreciate your time. Thanks, guys.
Well, thank you. We're delighted. We're honored to be here. Thank you to Bryn and the RecruitiFi team for having us back. Either it means that we did okay in San Francisco, or it means that the first 20 on the list weren't available. Either way, we're grateful. These are really exciting topics for us. This is a transformational moment in the history of global economies. It's a transformational moment as a result in the evolution of HR as a function, and as the world grapples with trying to figure out how to solve talent issues around the world. We've done a great deal of research trying to understand what good companies are doing, what the best companies are doing, what the best leaders are doing, what the best HR leaders are doing. And so Jory and I are going to present together. We'll take turns. We finish with the best. But we're going to give you a glimpse. I'm going to speak to through the HR lens. So I lead the CHRO practice. We work with many of the best companies in the world, frankly, many of the organizations here, in helping bring in heads of HR and solve some of their HR challenges. We advise many of the best CEOs on how to think about the evolving world of HR. Jory is going to talk about some pretty cutting-edge proprietary research that our consulting team just finished as a firm, looking into the activities, the performance, the behaviors of the best and brightest leaders in the best and brightest companies. And so at some point halfway through, we'll do a bit of a passing of the baton, and Jory will take it from there. The world is changing. Some of this is cliche, but if you'll step back for a minute and think about the changing pace that the world is going through. You think about the way the iPhone has changed the world. I actually was looking at a picture the other day and saw myself holding a BlackBerry. And if anyone is here from RIM, I apologize. But I almost don't remember life before BlackBerry, life before an iPhone. Holiday time, if anyone here has kids, you probably know that the days of going to Toys R Us for presents are gone. It's now, what is the latest and greatest iPhone, iPad related device? Whether it's wearables, in every way, shape, or form, the iPhone has changed the way we interact. It's changed the way that people socialize. It's changed the way commerce is done. Businesses, industries have closed down because of the emergence of the iPhone, and new ones have popped up behind it. And it is legitimately creating an entirely new ecosystem. You look at the way Uber has changed the world, and by the way, Uber wouldn't be here if the iPhone wasn't here. But Uber, a few years ago, didn't exist. Today, it's a nearly $70 billion market cap company. It is the way with which most of us travel. It has displaced cabs. It has displaced rental car companies. It is the grand scheme of Uber initially was that over a 10-year period, most of us wouldn't own cars anymore. If you drive less than 10,000 miles a year, you would Uber everywhere. And along the way, they had the epiphany that, hey, we could become the just-in-time delivery system for Amazon, and suddenly Amazon's 1-hour guaranteed delivery is through Uber. Department stores, Saks Fifth Avenue has announced that they're doing guaranteed 1-hour delivery. Phones are starting to come out, but it's through Uber. And so you now have Uber doing restaurant delivery in some towns. You have Uber doing package delivery, and taking us that people can now leave their car at home and go, whether it's go about business, go about their day, go out socializing, cutting down on drunk driving, all of that through a company that didn't exist 3 years ago. You think about Google, and this one actually, we could have written this 100 different ways, but you think about how Google has changed the way we source information. My kids still think I'm the smartest person in the world because they actually think Google is a friend of mine. They don't realize that I'm just doing something they could do and find every answer. But now you look at the transformation of Google to Apple to Alphabet company and their investments in driverless cars, their investments in the loons, where they're going to use balloons to put internet over undeveloped parts of the world. You look at where whether it's the driverless car software. There's so many different ways that they are investing and innovating, and it's literally happening at the speed of light. We talked about Amazon. Most of us, maybe I just have an addiction, most of us have Amazon boxes coming to our house as often as the US Postal Service comes. You want something, you're going to go to buy it. Amazon, at a minimum, you're probably looking at it to check pricing. You look at Amazon's efforts to create the drone delivery system, which they haven't yet perfected, but now the rest of the world is trying to figure out how to build a drone system, and the FAA is trying to figure out how to regulate drone delivery. You look at their 2-hour delivery. There's so many things that Amazon has changed. Even the way we watch television now, you could watch through some of their content, some of their media. The way we listen to music through their Echo. None of these things existed 3 or 4 years ago. So the world is changing at a frightening pace. Jory will show a couple of graphs later that help speak to this a different way. But if you really step back, you realize we almost take for granted how quickly things are happening. What does that mean for those of us in this room who spend our day looking at leadership talent and helping our own companies, helping our clients think about what their leaders look like for the future? So we did a study as a firm. We interviewed a couple of hundred CEOs with Oxford University. We pulled together a study, and it was really focused around the role of the CEO. And I would actually encourage anyone here to take a read of the research. It's pretty spectacular. But it speaks to the lack of readiness of CEOs as they step into the job. Somewhere north, Eric from our shop would probably have the statistics better, but somewhere north of 60% of CEOs acknowledge that their first year or two, they didn't know what to do in their job. Most acknowledge that they're actually still afraid of what's to come, that they don't feel prepared, even if they've been in the job for 5 or 6 years. They're dealing with new world order. They're dealing with activist investors. Even very profitable companies are suddenly find an activist or a social activist who thinks there's something they could be doing better. Ripple intelligence is the concept that we talked about for 30 years, this cliche of people, really good leaders could see around a corner. The best leaders had vision and they could see what was coming. The concept of ripple intelligence says that in this global world that we exist in today, as quickly as things are happening, as many forces there are, forces of change, forces of macroeconomic challenges in Asia, in Latin America, commodity markets being where they are, threats from terrorism, all of these different factors require a CEO have what we coined as ripple intelligence, which is the concept of, instead of seeing around the corner, you step back for a minute, imagine a kid throwing a rock in a pond. It hits the pond, water goes out in a bunch of different directions. And it becomes a bit of an early warning signal for the best leaders. They can start to think of the world as that rock in the pond and follow the waves and understand, where is my business going, where are my competitors going, where do I need to be developing capital, where do I need to be aligning my best people. Now imagine throwing 100 rocks in that pond. And you're trying to guess where all the waves are going to go and which, where is the current going to move it. The best leaders actually understand that and think of the world through that lens. Thrive in a VUCA world. VUCA, if anyone here doesn't know, VUCA 40 years ago was coined as a military term. It was a method of training Navy SEALs. And it was an idea. The concept was, how do you train people to live in a scary place and deal with volatility, uncertainty, chaos, ambiguity. And so a concept that used to be for training our most elite soldiers around the world is now something that we believe every CEO and every leader needs to actually be able to thrive in. There's so much happening so fast. The average CEO we talk to tells us that the hardest thing for them to grapple with is they no longer actually have time to run their company. They're spending time with legislators, they're spending time with investors, they're spending time with activists, they're spending time with social community leaders. Everything that happens is transparent. The whole world can see it because of social media, and you need to be able to thrive in that world. You have to lead with vision and purpose. The old model of a dictatorial CEO who would tell everyone what to do and drive just towards margin, drive towards top line, drive towards share price. There are too many choices out there for employees and for our people, and for all of us who are recruiting for companies. If a CEO isn't leading with a view that the choice is between doing right and right, it's not about right and wrong, we're always going to do the right thing, We're going to lead with a sense of vision. Here's what we're all about. Here's why we exist as a company. Here's what we're marching towards. The company's not compelling. The CEO, the leader is not compelling. And if they're not entirely authentic as people, it doesn't work. There was a time that some of us remember. Sadly, there's a few of us old enough to remember it, but there was a time where a CEO could be, or a business leader could be one person Monday through Friday, and an entirely different person at night or on weekends. Now, because of social media, because of all of the information 24/7, who you are is who you are. And if you try to be an inauthentic self in leading a company, you'll be exposed right away. It just doesn't work. You have to move fast. We've already talked about how quickly things are changing. If you're taking a few months thinking through a decision, it's probably 2 months too long. Our CEO likes to talk and spends a lot of time thinking about disruptors in the industry and where the world is going. And Tracy will often talk about the idea that we usually think about new consultants coming into the firm as a 3-year growth cliff, and we do 3-year business plans, and we do this 3-year, we think in terms of 3-year cycle. Tracy always goes back to Uber and says in 3 years, Uber went from nothing to $75 billion market cap. If you think a 3-year plan is the right timing, you're completely miscast, but 3 years from now, the world will look different. You failed. Everything needs to move quickly. We need to be agile. You need to make quick decisions. You need to move. Even if the decision is wrong, it's better than not moving at all. And this goes back to that last comment. You need to strengthen the core, know what you're good at. Jory's going to speak a lot to this in the research discussion in his presentation. But know what you're good at, become world-class at it, and obsess every day about who is trying to disrupt you. Because if you're not thinking about who is that company outside your industry that's trying to come in, if you are Ford Motor Company, General Motors, Chrysler, and you're not worrying about this little technology startup out in Silicon Valley that had this crazy vision, and the guy was trying to send people to the moon, and suddenly was going to create some battery-operated sports car that was affordable for the masses. If you didn't think 3 years ago that Tesla could exist, you're probably in a lot of trouble. And if you're in an automotive company today and you're only worried about Tesla, and you're not worrying about the Google driverless car, Apple driverless car, and 300 others that no one's ever heard of, you're going to be in trouble. So focus on what you're good at, become great, and then obsess over who are your potential disruptors over time. All of this is to say the role of HR is changing dramatically. The head of HR, we talk to clients about this all the time. If you're growing up today as a comp specialist, I'm sorry to say in 10 years, you're probably not a CHRO. The heads of HR of today, the heads of HR of the next 15 years are going to be talent experts who can help the leadership team better, help be the eyes and ears of the CEO and the board, understanding who is the next generation, who's going to lead the company, who's going to take the baton. Despite all of the search firms, we do great work at CEO search, we do great work at that level. Even with our involvement, somewhere north of 60% of all CEOs are grown within. And so even when we're involved, oftentimes the recommendation is to develop your internal to get there. HR needs to play a part in making sure that those individuals are ready for it. And again, if I go back to the CEO report, almost 70% said, I stepped into the job and I had no idea what I'm doing. I wasn't ready. HR's job is to make sure that starts to reverse and that people are ready when they step up into their roles. Again, know who your next generation is. Know who the generation is behind them. Make sure you're constantly obsessing over figuring out who are the best and brightest at every level in the organization. The best companies, the best heads of HR aren't just developing their executives. They're trying to figure out who are the administrative assistants that are culture carriers in the office that have potential to grow. Guide the board and CEO through the uncertainty of a VUCA world. Again, most acknowledge that they're not ready to make their way through it. HR needs to be the eyes and ears to say, here's where we have challenges, here's what we anticipate, here's what we're seeing competitively. Those of us in the room who spend our time recruiting, we can be an early warning signal to hear the companies that are coming out. Here are the new technologies that people are getting excited about that could be disruptive to us as our business. It's our job in HR to deliver that intelligence. Focus on accelerating performance. Get companies moving faster. Again, Jory will speak to this in detail, but it's all about how do we get individuals, teams, and companies working quicker and more efficiently. Leverage the right data to support the business and decision making. The days of going in and advising based on gut feel The days of going into a CEO and making recommendations on shifting major things in the organization without the data are over. The best heads of HR, the best HR organizations are the ones who are going into the CEO incredibly well informed with the right data. When we were in San Francisco at the last RecruitiFi event, there was a Salesforce presentation. They're not here today, right? So the woman was pretty spectacular, and she talked about inside Salesforce, they realized they did an analysis, and they're big data aggregators. And they realized that somewhere 80+% of every engineering person in San Francisco, they had already talked to. Their numbers in Seattle were not quite as ridiculous, but pretty bad. And so they brought all of that data and realized that Massachusetts was a state where they had talked to, over the history of their company, less than 10% of the engineering talent in Boston, and recommended to the CEO that they open a massive campus in Boston just as a way to grow the business and bring in the talent that they want. That is credible HR. That's what CEOs and boards are going to start to demand. Today, they think they want it. They don't even really know it exists. But that's what great HR is going to look like over the next 10 years. And then as part of it, move beyond this notion of where are the people. That is a concept that I think has been dying a slow death. But this notion of HR as the caretakers and we're here to make people feel better, I don't remember the last time a CEO said to us, hey, find us someone who can make my people feel better. It's just not what the world wants or needs. Equally profound impact on talent acquisition. Most of you, I suspect, are leveraging daily social media tools. It's why RecruitiFi is such an important tool to have in the toolkit. If you're just doing one type of recruiting, if your only social media strategy is LinkedIn, you're living 10 years behind. It's about understanding every possible way to get at the best talent, because every one of your competitors are trying to get the talent, and even companies that you don't consider a competitor are trying to get the talent. I would venture to guess that almost any person in this room at some level is competing with Google for some of their talent. The traditional competitor set has changed, and if we're going to help our companies win the battle for talent, we're going to have to get really creative, and we're going to become expert at using technology. Similarly, we're going to harness digital tools and be able to figure out who are the real players versus who are the posers. Almost anyone can look good in their social media profile. Almost anyone can make a LinkedIn profile look good. You could hire someone to give you the right keywords. HR folks know how to interview. Our job is going to be to leverage those tools to really decipher the real from the fake. Focus on data-driven decision-making. And data-driven could mean harnessing everything available on social media. It more likely means using a series of different assessment tools and bringing them to bear for our companies, whether it's psychometric, behavioral, existential. There's a host of different tools out there. There are whole companies that exist now that are trying to understand better what makes a good engineer and what coding is better, and algorithm-based models to understand what good engineers and tech talent looks like. If we're not using them, we're falling behind. And then if our CEOs and our leaders are living in a world as absolutely pants on fire, chaotic as it is, if we can't exist in that market and be at the forefront, then we're not going to be around in 5 years. There's just a couple of quotes just to give you a sense when we talk about speed. I won't read all of them, but a couple that I find are noteworthy. So I'll take Mary Barra at General Motors. I believe the auto industry will change more in the next 5 to 10 years than it has in the past 50. And actually, if you talk to Mary offline, she will tell you it'll change more in the next 5 than it has in the past 80. If you think about 5 years ago, all of the conversation around automotive was moving towards battery operated. Could we create hybrids? Could we lessen the carbon footprint, and what's going to happen with the Prius? And could Detroit come up with a comparable vehicle? Now, if you own a Tesla, you push a button and it drives itself. You have Google just put $100 million into driverless cars. And if you think that's where it's going to end, you're probably going to be shocked in 5 or 10 years. That's how quickly the world is changing. You look at Mark Burnoff from Salesforce. Speed is the new currency of business. The silver bullet, you might say, is speed, the idea of speed. If you look at them, all of them speak to how fast we have to move, even if there's a chance you're wrong. Mark Zuckerberg, move fast, break things. Unless you're breaking stuff, you're not moving fast enough. That's the way the best and brightest innovative CEOs are thinking about the world and encouraging their teams to operate. We all need to be operating at that level. With that, I'll give the mic to Jory.
Thank you, Dan. So if you haven't figured out from what Dan had been talking about, the world is moving at an incredibly rapid pace. Many of your companies are dealing with change that you haven't seen before on unprecedented levels and all of that, what that means, whether it be driven from technology, demographic shifts, and other factors that amp up disruptive movements in organizations. There's a lot of downward pressure on leaders and leaders at all levels. So a lot of this research has been drawn from leadership at the top of the house, but when you think about it, you have leaders, throughout the entire HR stack in the organization, and as a result, you have leaders at different points in their careers, but much of this data, much of this research, and much of what we talk about today can easily be transferred throughout the entire organization. Let's see if I get this right. Okay, accelerating performance and the impact on talent. That's been the thesis for our discussion today. And as you all think about what you're doing, you're acquiring talent, and yet you're acquiring talent and also having to drive performance in your organization. I've often said that while we hire individuals, they operate in teams, and I know there's a presentation later by Lex Fenwick that's going to talk about the importance of teams. And I think you'll see, I haven't seen his presentation, nor has he seen ours, but I would suspect that there's a lot of synergies in what he's going to be talking about as it relates to bringing in individuals into an organization and how that will translate to how they perform within the context of teams. We've said this before, we're saying again, industries are being disrupted at an ever-increasing pace. You've got to be smart about what you're doing in business. You've got to be smart about, to Dan's point earlier, about preserving the core of your industry, while at the same time embracing disruptive change, right? And how that will translate to the talent equation and the people that you look to attract on an ongoing basis within the organization. We did a body of research, which we have identified the superaccelerators. What are the characteristics of organizations that accelerate and drive change at exponentially increased volumes? And we did a fairly large body of research. We looked at the FT500. I'll come to that in a moment, and I'll explain to you what that looked like. We identified characteristics around these superaccelerators, how they mobilize, how they execute, and how they transform, and they do all of that within the context of agility. We call that the meta model. M plus E plus T equals acceleration. Our research, as I said a moment ago, studied the FT500. We applied 4 rules of 20. And we put them through a funnel, and the rules are as they are described here. They had to grow, be the top 20% of growth over the past 3 and 7 years. They had to have no more than 20% of their growth from inorganic growth, that is acquisitions. No more of 20% of funding could come from their home state, which neutralized a little bit about the growth patterns of state-owned enterprises, and there are many examples of SOEs around the globe, and no more than 20% decline in profit margin during that period of time. So just keep those thoughts in mind as we continue this conversation. I'll try to keep it light, but I'll also try to keep it as informative as possible. So change is happening fast. We talked about that a moment ago. If you look at innovation growth, you can see the curves of applications to grants over the period of time from 1963 to 2013. The numbers are less relevant than the growth. Technology adoption. This is a really interesting slide, interesting statistic. And I know it's a tough slide to see. It's going to get a little busier as I keep building on it. But fundamentally, it took 38 years to reach 50 million users when the radio was first deployed. Think about that. Fast forward down the left to right, 4 years to adopt handheld devices. 1 year for Facebook and 0.8 of a year for Twitter. That tells you that things are moving pretty rapidly. Internet monetization, and many of you work for technology companies, this is a really fascinating number. The market cap of the top 15 internet companies in 1995 was $16 billion. The market cap in 2014 was $2.4 trillion. That's not a long period of time, 19, 20 years, and you can see the impact of technology growth. China's growth kind of going the other way for the past several years. European financial stability, I don't think I have to make any comments about that. we all worry about what's happening in Europe. The good news is we think Brexit was a 2-week event. I was with a COO of a major financial company yesterday, and when I set the meeting, it was to talk about some work that we did with our clients around Brexit, and we sort of sat down and looked at each other, and we said, well, it's not that interesting anymore. I mean, it's actually presenting opportunities for many clients today. Company longevity in the S&P 500. This is a really interesting notion. It tells you that in 1935, you had 90 years of relevance. In 2014, you've got 18 years. And in 2030, you may only have 10. And so companies will come in and out of industries based upon their ability to innovate and based upon their ability to keep up with change and change at a very rapid rate. And it happens at all levels. It happens around the world. You could look at big economies around the world. It happens in industries. It happens in companies. And you could look at some of these numbers. Again, it's a bit of a busy slide, but think about a couple of things that I'll call out from here. By 2025, 46 of the global top 200 cities will be in China. If you think about the need for immediate business critical information that drives investments in data, Dan talked about big data and market analytics. We're all living that in our own worlds in talent, in our own worlds in our company. It's going to be a very data-driven world. 2020, 4 out of 10 college graduates across the globe will be either Chinese or Indian. That tells you about what's happening in those economies and those educational markets. We talked a little earlier about mobilizing, executing, transforming, and agility. Again, our meta model, and we go to market using this as we help clients help their own acceleration, how they also help, we coach teams and develop teams around this concept. Again, mobilizing, inspired, aligned action, execute, harness the resources of the organization in a very streamlined manner, transform, reinventing your existing business model. Let me back up. Protecting your existing business model while you're reinventing your existing business model and disrupting yourself as opposed to be disrupted. I think that's an important guidepost for many CEOs. And then, of course, the ability to adapt quickly and to adjust to changing markets and changing dynamics in the world in which we live. What we found in the research that we did, and there were 2 flavors of this. There was one, the 23 companies that we identified and put through a filtering process in the FT 500, and then a broader body of research. This is no surprise here. It sort of reinforces the point, but that's the good news. The single biggest driver of acceleration is the quality of leadership in the organization. Accelerating teams perform 23% better on average than their derailing teams. And accelerating organization perform at 37% faster and generate 30% higher profits. Those are considerable statistics that are worth noting as you think about how you bring in talent and how you think about coaching and developing that talent over time, and you think about acceleration within your own organizations. The filtering system is, as I described it, we put this big bucket of companies in called the FT5 Global 500, and we went through this series of analyses that spit out 23 companies that fit into the super accelerated category. Now, I want to be clear, a lot of the FT 500 is accelerating, but we're talking about super acceleration, and that's really an important thing to anchor around as you look at the numbers. So as we look at super accelerating companies ranked by total revenue, the list is impressive. Some of these names are absolutely no surprise to you. Some of them are. Some of them you may not even know what the companies do, but they're all on the FT 500, and they all met those characteristics. And for those of you in this room who work for one of these companies, you should be proud of that. This supports what you know about what you're doing inside your organization, but certainly empirically demonstrates that this is an impressive list. Again, any metric that you put into this group is significant. So the average CAGR of super accelerating companies for a 3-year period is 24%, which is 9 times the average CAGR, compounded annual growth rate of the entire group. When you look at the average CAGR over a 7-year period, it's 20% greater than their peer group of the FT 500, and 4 times the average of the entire body, the entire population. This is a busy slide. Just take it to know that we have identified 14 factors that mattered in driving accelerations. And just to call out a couple of them: clarity, be clear about what you're doing; energizing leadership, when your leaders stand up in front of you, and again, leaders at every level in the organization. Think about not only CEOs, C-suite executives, but think about throughout the entire HR stack. You have leaders, they need to create, they need to have energy, they need to be able to compel people, they need to be able to create followership along whatever the vision, purpose of the organization is, and strategy, of course. They need to challenge the status quo. They need to also engender collaboration. And equally importantly, they need to be adaptable and resilient, because again, you embark upon a program of change, something comes at you. Dan talked about ripple intelligence and being able to see around the corner. You need to adapt to whatever those competing pressures are for what you're trying to do. And of course, within the organization, you've got competing resources, so adaptability around your own competing resources, I think, is equally important. Elite companies excel at all of these 13 characteristics: customer first, winning capabilities, collaboration, resilience, adaptability. They all score 7s. Again, this was drawn from research that's been done over actually a larger group of companies. I think the total population of this group of companies is about 2,500, but that notwithstanding, the data suggests that, you know, the elite companies excel at all of these things in different proportions and in different recipes. The superaccelerators use a combination of high-impact actions to drive acceleration. Again, this is a little bit redundant from the slide before, but I think you get the message that there needs to be certain anchors by which you go to market that will generate your acceleration, that will allow you to adapt to change and allow you to move within the context of this volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world in which we all operate. So having clarity, having purpose, having vision, having foresight, being adaptable are all part of the characteristics and portfolio of tools that leaders who can lead and organizations who can drive performance will have in their toolkit. They choose one recipe and are distinctively good at it. What does that mean? It means that not all of those 37 characteristics and 13 buckets and all the metrics and capabilities and the math that goes along with that, you have to adapt, embrace all of them. You embrace the characteristics that are important to you in your organization, and you focus on that, and that will drive your performance, whether it be in football, whether it be in tennis, or whether it be in golf. They found a recipe that worked for them. Hours in the gym, days on the practice, coaching, not coaching, all of the things that go, strength training, and so on and so forth. So you pick the recipe and you run with it. And to reinforce this at the corporate level, successful companies follow one of a smaller number of recipes, right? So again, you anchor on what you're good at, what you want to be best known for. These organizations are identified for different characteristics, whether it be a customer intimate relationship, whether it be a portfolio investor where they have multiple businesses and multiple businesses within those multiple lines of business that they invest in, whether they're talent magnets. Think about the quality of talent that comes out of comes into these organizations and then comes out of these organizations. And then similarly, you have other enterprises that are just execution engines. They just excel at getting stuff done. I think all of us could resonate with the notion that, you know, ideas are interesting, implementation's everything. That's all about execution. There are other factors that drive the choice for the right recipe, and you got to pick those characteristics. Again, at the heart of this is all about accelerating performance. You got to know where you want to go. You want to understand the competitive landscape. You want to know clearly what the future calls for, and you want to know what you stand for. And if you could pull all of those elements together in a cohesive manner, you actually have a good shot of winning in the marketplace. And again, whether it be winning at the local level, the regional level, or the global level, that's what you have to pull together. And again, as you think about what it means for talent acquisition, as you think about the people that you recruit, whether they be at entry level or they be 3, 5-year, 10-year level individuals, executives, first level executives, these are the characteristics that you should want to look for and again, apply to your own organization so that you are selecting the right types of talent that will resonate with inside the company and grow with the company. Won't review much of what Dan talked about earlier today around ripple intelligence, but I think this is really important to just say one point, which is the ability to see what happens after you take a certain course of action and how that ripples through the enterprise and how you have to adjust accordingly. Collaboration, liquid leadership as we call it, is particularly important. Again, we don't work in hierarchical organizations anymore. We work in relatively flat organizations with interconnected teams. Teams come together for periods of time, then they dispel. We have coined an expression that's, when you're in an organization and you're on a team, you're really a guest at someone else's table. But eventually the meal's going to end and you're going to have to go off and do something else, right? So we think about that in that context. This point around paradox, really ties a little bit to ripple intelligence and how you see the world at large, but it's really looking through and getting, I'm sorry, were you signaling something to me? Oh, I have 10 minutes left. Okay, I'll speed it up. Sorry about that. Thank you. Is really getting through the gray and understanding how you have to reframe. The world isn't black and white. Anyway, the ultimate point here, and this really comes to near the end of this discussion, is we need to be aware of the acceleration trap. You can drive yourself crazy, and you can drive your organization crazy by doing too many things too quickly and with too much energy. So you got to pick your shots, and you can't be jumping from from one pebble to another pebble to a rock to a pebble back and so on and so forth. You really need to pick your shots. And again, accelerating organization doesn't mean doing everything more quickly necessarily. It just means executing with flawlessly. Nothing changes, and this is no big surprise, unless behavior changes. And behavior changes in a variety of ways, through coaching, development, and so on. But it also changes when you introduce new talent into the organization. And in the framework of what all of you do in this room around bringing talent into your respective companies, you need to keep some of these guiding principles in mind. Excel, look for individuals who excel at quickly and boldly scaling new ideas. Look within the organization to innovate, to shape ideas, and to shape how you respond to customer needs. Effectively balancing performing today and investing for tomorrow. And of course, invest with courage, and most importantly, sustain energy and optimism. And you can see those companies that employ those guiding principles in the people they hire and how they manage and lead their organizations are also organizations that accelerate, and those who don't, and again, this is all based upon the research that we talked about earlier in this discussion, will derail. And so, the recipes that you choose, the guiding principles by which you build your organization and manage your people, and most importantly, how you select talent and develop that talent within the organization, all has to have these elements in mind. With that, I'll say thank you. I kept to under my 10-minute warning, which is good, and we'll have an opportunity to take some questions. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much for your great presentation. I was wondering what's your thoughts. We talk about disruption, but how do you see disruption going to affect two things, the staffing industry and the second thing, executive search industries in regards to online talent recruiting platforms?
Right, so that's two big questions. I think in the staffing world, here's an example of an entity that is looking to disrupt how we staff our organizations, how you work with the various service providers you have, your partners on the outside who help deliver your talent. And I think we're seeing many other examples of experiments, as I'll call them, and some more than experiments. I would say RecruitiFi is more than an experiment, as well into proof of concept. And I think you'll see technology play an ever greater part in that. If you look at disruption broadly in the world at large, you tend to it's the easiest place to disrupt tends to be at the basis of businesses, and then it becomes harder as you move up, both within an organization and within an ecosystem within an industry. So in the contingent marketplace and the contingent labor marketplace and in the RPO space and places like that, I think you're going to see technology playing an ever important part. And again, RecruitiFi would be an example of a disruptive technology and a capability that will have impact. Just don't know what it's going to be yet. At the high end of the marketplace, it gets a little bit into Heidrick and Struggle strategy, so I'm going to avoid some of the answer to that question. But make no mistake, we're thinking about that. And we don't believe that at the levels at which we operate today and the impact that our clients are wanting to have, that we will eliminate the human judgment and the human intervention, but and how we're immunizing ourselves from that disruption is recognizing that we have to provide ever-increasing value and advice to our clients to support the otherwise transactions. So if you think about the history of, call it large-scale executive search, started out as a transaction-based business, a transaction-based professional service, and is moving slowly and frankly now very quickly to an advisory-based business. And the quality of that advice and the quality of what you do for your clients to support the judgments we make is really what will be a big impact in what our company and our industry looks like going forward. Dan, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I would only add, I agree, Jory, with everything you said. If you think about, in general, this space, if you go out to Silicon Valley, if you talk to venture investors, HR tech is one of the hottest recipients of capital. Everyone is trying to figure out how to invest in the space. You look at Microsoft's acquisition of LinkedIn, and it speaks to how much money, capital, attention is going to the space. Now, I am sadly old enough to remember when Monster was going to put all of us out of jobs. 8 years ago, LinkedIn was going to turn all of us into robots. And the reality is none of that is that's not the reality of the future. But to Jory's point, there are so many tools out there that when I started in this business 20 plus years ago, the question we would get from clients was, well, how big is your database? Do you know of people in the space? Now it's kind of a given that if you don't know them, we could find them. Everyone has access to the same information. Everyone can access all of these different social media. They're open platforms. It then comes back to Jory's point. It's about value. It's about all of us, outside and inside, upping our game. Do we know the people well? Are we building those relationships? Are we building relationships for the future? Do we have the ability to do deeper assessments? Can we advise our clients in a more meaningful way? The technology is in some ways, it's making our jobs much easier because everything is at our fingertips, but it also now requires that over time, we all have to start to really up our game, and internally and externally, we need to be true advisors and consultants to our clients.
If I could just add one other comment to that, and Dan will remember this because he actually put the panel together. A couple of years ago at one of our global partner meetings, we hosted, as we tend to do, a variety of panels. This particular one was amongst CHROs. And one of the CHROs in the panel made a comment which really stuck with me, and it ties a little bit to your question. Judgment in the absence of data is as bad as data in the absence of judgment. And what's, at least between most of your ears, maybe not mine so much anymore, is an important element that drives judgment. And again, judgment in the absence of data is as bad as data in the absence of judgment. So I think that you're going to see a lot more data-driven decision-making and a little bit more data science and predictive analytics in the work that we do.
Any other questions? We have time for one more.
To that, and the comment that 60% of the CEOs now are being promoted internally, which the planning, influence on stock price, a whole bunch of other things, it's better if you don't have to go to search and there's a plan. How much work are you doing on that sort of getting into the C-suite, benchmarking, preparation, internal, external, pipelining, so that you're not actually conducting a search, you're doing the search before the search and presenting that data so that, again, the reduction or mitigating potential ripple effects if there were to be a sudden change at the C-suite?
Yeah. So two things, and I'll really try to keep this short. So number one is that while 60% of CEOs, or for that matter, 60% of many, a good deal of executive promotions come from within, we're also living in a world where investors, where activist investors, where boards want to have objectivity. So that decision doesn't happen in the absence of looking at the external market. So that's number one. Number two, we often come in doing talent development studies and talent studies as clients come to us and say, we're thinking about opening up an office here, or we're thinking about expanding into this product set. What does our competitors look like? So the kind of talent studies I think that you're referencing, we do quite a bit. So we're doing more of that. And if you track Heidrick at all, you'll know that we've made significant investments in our leadership consulting and advisory business as well as our culture shaping business, because guess what? That's the kind of advice that our clients are wanting to seek in addition to our core leadership search business. Dan, what would you put on that?
I think you nailed it.
Okay. So with that, we'll thank you for your time. Hopefully this was informative, and enjoy the rest of your day here.
Thank you so much.